All right, as I mentioned, today was President Biden's big moment on the world stage in his first United Nations address as president. The pared-down COVID-compliant audience of world leaders and diplomats watched as the president attempted to reset America's standing and reassure a nervous international community.
Back at the table in international forums, especially the United Nations, to focus attention and to spur global action on shared challenges.
Joining me now is Senator Tom Cotton, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, it's good to be back on with you.
Well, as the president said, America's back at the table, but then he went on to talk about how we rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. We're running to retake a seat on the Human Rights Council at the UN. We're taking action globally on COVID. Is the president really addressing the greatest threats facing America?
Well, Tony, I don't know what table we're at, but whoever's sitting at that table, if they're an ally, is pretty skeptical of us after the Afghanistan fiasco. And it's certainly not France, which took the extraordinary step of recalling its ambassador last week because the Biden administration didn't undertake the most basic aspect of diplomatic outreach when we struck a new deal with the Australians to provide them nuclear-powered submarines. But I would say that this speech today was really Joe Biden walking into the United Nations and slapping a giant kick me sign on Uncle Sam's back. You know, he said that we don't seek a new Cold War, but Tony, he didn't even say who we're trying to avoid a Cold War with. He literally did not use the word China in his entire speech. Xi Jinping and communist leaders in Beijing are laughing at Joe Biden and America now because they have, in fact, been waging a Cold War on America and America's interests and principles for years. So it's not a matter of whether that Cold War happens, just a matter of whether we will join it and we will win. And Joe Biden is acting like a scared child in a Harry Potter novel who won't even say the name Voldemort because he's afraid of what will happen.
Senator, I think it's a really good point. The Cold War is unfolding whether we acknowledge it or not. And even the Secretary of the United Nations acknowledges that this is brewing between the two countries. And there's, as you said, there's no way to win a war, whether it's a Cold War or it's an active war, unless you acknowledge who your enemy is and you understand what they're trying to do.
Yeah, when your enemy is waging war on you, whether it's a hot war or a cold war, you don't get a choice of whether there will be a war. You only get a choice of whether you will win or whether you will lose. And Joe Biden is returning us to the bad old days when America's leaders stuck their heads in the sands. They didn't confront China and didn't stand up for America's interest, whether it's the millions of jobs that China has stolen from us in one-sided trade deals or the millions more in oil and gas and coal production that Joe Biden would sell out for nothing more than a fig leaf of promises from one of the world's most polluting nations. The fact that they're building a military that is capable in probably 5 to 10 years of overmatching ours, especially when paired with other adversaries, and that they are trampling all over fundamental American principles by violating the rights of religious liberty and political freedom of their own people in the tens of millions. Joe Biden, again, wouldn't even say China's name today, much less lay out a strategy for how to counter Chinese influence in the world, which is the most urgent task we have in American foreign policy.
Well, the two big issues the president talked, he only mentioned Afghanistan in passing because if he talked too much about that, he knew it would come back on him because the disaster was his. He made it. But he talked about climate change and he talked about COVID-19. And when I heard him talking about that, in the absence of failing to mention China, I mean, China is behind, first off, I mean, we've talked about this before, COVID-19, we wouldn't have this if it were not for China. And when you look at global warming in these countries that are polluting and adding to the problem with the climate, it's China, and they get a pass.
Yeah, I mean, it is, as you say, global warming. It's not American warming, despite what all of these blame America first Democrats have you. In fact, our emissions have actually been declining in recent
Yes.
years, thanks to the
Yes, they
miracle of hydraulic fracturing and directional drilling that has unlocked so much natural gas for us to use to fuel our homes and our businesses. China's emissions have continued to increase. And if Joe Biden and John Kerry think that Xi Jinping is going to stop burning coal because Joe Biden, wants to have some celebratory signing of a new climate accord, I mean, they have another thing coming. But this is exactly what the Democrats have done for decades with China. They've accepted fleeting, meaningless promises in return to concrete concessions. I mean, I am always worried when John Kerry jets off to China that we're going to come back with a Neville Chamberlain-like peace in our time deal in which we agree to hand over Taiwan's autonomy to mainland China. In return, they were promised to reduce their emissions maybe by 3% in 2075.
So what was, in your opinion, Senator Cotton, what was the most glaring absence? Was it just the mention of China, or was it putting them on notice that America is going to fight for our ideals and principles?
I literally couldn't believe it, Tony, when I first heard that he hadn't mentioned China. I went back and reread the transcript, and I thought my eyes must be playing tricks on me. So I loaded it up on the computer and did a Control-F search function. I couldn't believe that he didn't even mention the name of our number one adversary in the world. I mean, can you imagine any Cold War president going to the United Nations and not mentioning the name Russia, or George Bush or Barack Obama or Donald Trump going to the United Nations and not speaking of terrorism? I mean, it's almost unfathomable that he would go and not even mention China's name as he's trying to avert a war that China's already raging against us.
Right. And it won't go away by ignoring it. Senator Tom Cotton, always great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us today.